Okay, and it looks like we are live. And I ain't going to do the long intros and all that different stuff. We're just going to kind of just go into the discussion that we are meant to do today. Uh, hey everyone, so we've got part two of our discussion, myself and Mr. Chris Spence, about the Caribbean immigrants' experience in the U.S. And what a week! What a crazy week have we had? The serious situation that's going on in Minnesota, the serious situation that's going on now, kind of countrywide. People are protesting about the different things that's going on, targeting especially men of color. So I want to, you know, bring Chris on and we'll just talk and we got a little structure of the way how things supposed to be, but we'll kind of sway away from there sometimes and still have a good conversation. So here we go. Chris Wapman.
Hey, what's happening? All right.
I'm all right. I mean, I'm living. I'm existing. I don't think I'm
Right.
really living right now. Um, having to deal with the subjects and the topics that's going on in Black America. I don't see it as as something that that's them and this is me. I
Mm-hmm.
am black and I am in America and these are my problems as well.
Right.
And this week has been a hell of a week in the sense that my wife anxieties because I up and leave the house. You don't know if I could end up being a freaking guy with his head and neck under some police officer's knee.
Mm-hmm.
She has black children that she's caring for. She has a black brother. She has a black father-in-law. She has black friends, and these are the experiences that you know people they don't see. People don't see you as, oh, he's Caribbean black. He's not as threatening as the American black.
Mm-hmm.
They don't see you as he's Caribbean black. He's not as threatening as say the African black or the down South American black. You're black, and these are things that come. These types of weeks kind of bring it all into reality.
Mm-hmm. No, certainly. I mean, and that it almost seems like it's a natural segue from where we left off last week,
Yeah.
talking about the biases that we conjure up in our mind, those
Hmm.
preconceived notions that we've come into new context with that keep us divided, right?
Yeah.
That create more labels and layers of division.
Hmm. I
And
mean,
then we're forced with this reality that all those things mean really nothing at the end of the day.
pretty much it's the haves versus the have-nots is what I'm experiencing. And the haves as in those that are in the power structures that the system is meant to support, protect, and serve them. The have-nots, unfortunately, are those, I feel like, you know as a tall man of color who I was told when I was in Germany by my supervisors there, white female, told me, "Oh, this you're built like a linebacker."
Mm,
I wasn't viewed as
mm.
another worker. I was always reminded that I'm the only big black dude that works at that place. This is this is the reality that I'm living in, and it's unfortunately something that I didn't really want to think about, but it is my reality.
No, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, that the sensationalizing sometimes that happens in society based upon physical features
Hmm.
stokes at the
It's
very fears that many have been programmed to have,
yeah, yeah,
right? And so it leads to situations exactly like you're talking about. Um,
yeah.
you know, I see exactly what you're saying in terms of the haves and the have-nots, and I kind of want to add a little bit of context to that if I could.
Go ahead.
Um, I think when we look at structural isms, right? Whatever that ism may be, there's always going to be someone who's going to benefit in that ism and someone who is going to be at odds in that ism, so to speak, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when we look at people who are on the benefiting side of things, and even some who may be on the losing end of it, right? If the structure was designed for Group A, the members of Group A are made up of three types: those who are unaware of the system's design, I mean, seriously unaware of the system's design.
Mm-hmm.
There are those who are aware of the system's design, but don't want to do anything about it.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are those who know about the system's design and do everything in their power to maintain it, right? And so even if you look at the group of halves, they can be broken into three other groups.
Yeah.
Those that are aware, maybe, maybe not, but they don't have the
Al-
tools to start to assess it. Then
They're
there are those who are
aloof.
fully aware, but they're apathetic to getting up and moving towards becoming allies and anti-racist, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then there are those who are aware of the system's design and work willfully to maintain its structure. The question we have to ask
Oh,
ourselves and ask our white friends are, which one are you?
yeah. Well, I asked. I purposely remember when I remember we had in our discussion last week. I
Mm-hmm.
said, you know, I like shaking up the sort of willful, blissful ignorance that a lot of people live in. And why to shake it up? Because you willfully living in that blissful ignorance,
Mm-hmm.
it's often at the detriment of those that are living in an everyday watch my back sort of situation. And you need to be aware of that, and you need to bring awareness to it and address those that allow you to enjoy this benefit.
Right? Yeah.
But that's just, you know,
I mean, I
that, that
agree. I agree. The, the time for people to say that they're no longer aware of the realities of the manifestations of racism is over.
mm-hmm.
Let's be very clear with that. The time for people to claim that they're unaware is over. If you tell me that you don't know how to begin to tackle the conversation, I understand, right? And I'm
Yeah.
willing to work with you. If you tell me that you see the situation and you're still unwilling to act, then we have a different type of conversation,
Mm.
if any. Because
There's some
because
of those.
because
There's
at
some
that
of those
point,
that don't want to do it.
right? Because at that point, you're choosing to no longer be you're choosing not to be an ally. And if you're not an ally, then your silence is consent, and your
Mm-hmm.
silence is support for the system and the structure that exists, right? And I think
Yeah.
sometimes people have a tough time understanding or processing the concept of privilege, right?
Mm.
Um,
What is privilege? What do you mean? What is that privilege thing you're talking about?
right. See, privilege is a dynamic. It's a dynamic concept, and it
Mm-hmm.
really depends on what's the context that you're talking about. So if we're going to talk about race, we're going to talk about race-based privilege. We have to look at the racial gradient that was created by some pseudoscientists in the 1600s, upon which every other structure has been built. Let's
Mm-hmm.
also be very clear about that, because what the adventurers, as we would like to call them euphemistically, who set west, what they brought with them was also their philosophies on how society was supposed to be, on different strata, right? So we really then have to take a look at that system that was built around that, and we have to work towards starting to deconstruct it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I want to find an ally who's willing to deconstruct that system along with me.
Hmm. Hmm. But that ally may be fearful of being ostracized or pushed out of that beneficial group. Hey, if I
I
know that
understand.
it's kind of like this. Hey, if I know that all I got to do is keep breathing and I get to walk in the land of milk and honey,
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to keep breathing, and that's it. I'm not going to do anything else. Some
There we
people
go.
don't want to put in that work.
How do we overcome that inertia, right? I,
You are
I wish
right.
I wish I had the answer for you. And what I would say too is, in light of situations like this, particularly in years where we have political campaigns, I want us all to be very mindful of politicians who offer simple solutions to very complex problems,
Mm-hmm.
particularly if those politicians themselves have been lifetime politicians.
Mm-hmm.
Because here's what I challenge them on: if the solution is so simple, why haven't you already implemented it?
Some
So
folks
what you
just don't want to do that.
right, so what you're doing is you're capitalizing on a situation for political mileage, but you don't intend on really doing anything about it.
Correct.
You know, and so a conversation I had this afternoon, and I just kind of want to share a piece of it with you, is for every politician who's running for office right now and has a commentary in terms of a solution to getting America towards a post-racial society,
Mm.
I asked them, what is your record on actions you have taken so far towards that goal?
Yeah.
Because if you cannot show me that your track record has been preparing you for this lofty goal of solving this massive problem, then what you're selling me is lip service because you're unprepared to really address it, and you're never really going to ever be able to deliver on it. So we
Hmm.
have to be mindful of that as well.
Can I ask? Because I saw an eye on your shirt.
Uh huh.
Can you show the viewers and them what your shirt say?
Oh, yeah, sure. I wish I had. No, this was from back in the Eric Gardner situation. I wish I had the ability to make a revision on this. I would add still.
Oh my goodness.
Let's drive the conversation.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's a conversation. It's a conversation that's needed. It's a conversation that a lot of people try to avoid.
Hmm.
The black struggle in America is the Caribbean man's struggle as well. The
They
Caribbean
are
man, the Caribbean
intertwined.
woman's a struggle. We
Hmm.
we are the only difference between us and the American black person, man or woman, is where our ancestors got dropped off during that ride. Is what I always hear.
Yeah, no question.
Hmm.
And even if you look at it from a historical context, the post-colonial, oh sorry, the liberation struggles
Mm-hmm.
through to the post-colonial to the through the colonial to the post-colonial periods throughout the Caribbean, the Americas, and this landmass that is North America
Mm-hmm.
have always been intertwined. There's always been a transpollination of ideas
Yeah.
from the Caribbean to America, to North America, sorry, and from North America to the Caribbean, Central America to the Caribbean, Caribbean to the
Mm.
Central America, and vice versa. And so to divide the struggle according to geographic lines will be to minimize it and to minimize the magnitude of what has been accomplished if we look at the depraved reality that was slavery and
Mm-hmm.
that period of time in this region. And so if we divide it geographically, we're really minimizing the accomplishments that we've made, right?
Yeah.
And so today we set in another axis of discomfort
Mm-hmm.
because what happened to Mr. Cooper in New York City is as much tied to what happened to Mr. Floyd in Minneapolis.
Mm-hmm.
But in the larger context, it's still tied to what's happening throughout the Caribbean,
Mm-hmm.
Central and South America.
Ooh, especially Brazil. Oh my goodness.
Let's look at it. Let's talk about it,
Ooh, yeah.
right?
Yep.
And so even if we take a look at at what Brazil's leadership's decisions are regarding the response to COVID and the threats thereof, you can see that there is inherent bias, both from the individuals themselves who will speak their own implicit bias, and then you
Mm-hmm.
see it in legislation, which is the explicit bias, right? And so then
Mm-hmm.
society then starts to mirror that. And so we have stokes, we have lines of division that continue to be stoked. And when that happens from the highest offices, we have to ask ourselves, what do we expect from those offices? And are we getting what we expect from them? And if not, then we have the power to make change,
Hmm.
right? And
Well,
so, I'm sorry, go ahead.
you're right. You are absolutely right. So go ahead, continue. I'm listening.
So, and so when we talk about change, there are opportunities for short term, medium term, and long term action. And I want to stress the long term action because we didn't get to where we are today overnight. So we're not
Mm-hmm.
going to get out of where we are today tomorrow. We're not going to wake up and things are going to be better. There's no magic bullet for this. It's
Mm-hmm.
ugly and it's dirty and it's going to take work and it's going to take a lot of work. So we have to have that long term strategy. There's that coin phrase of how do you how do you not let it be a moment, but it turns it into a movement. It
Mm-hmm.
becomes a movement when we have an action plan, short, medium, and long term. And in the short term, a lot is happening. And if we could, let's put that on ice for a little bit and let's talk about medium term, right? Medium term,
Bef- hold on, hold
go
on,
ahead.
hold on, hold on, hold on.
Yes, sir.
Before you jump into medium term,
Mm-hmm.
we have a comment that came in from your
All
better
right.
half.
Uh-oh.
She said, dealing with this isn't easy. It is difficult on both fronts, white and black, for different reasons. Before you know their personality. So I know and see some white people who are non-stop fighting and bringing this to light. Make no mistake that their privilege will not change, but they are fighting and making people see that it is okay to say loudly what is wrong. And that fight will make other white people feel, hold on.
Mm-hmm.
I think it stopped, but we got
Probably
the
like
point that she was saying.
they should act. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. Meaning those are the people who are allies in this struggle. And they are voluntarily choosing to take on the mantle and the responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
So, salute to them, 100%. No question. The, the amelioration of the black race globally has always had allies.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot point to any struggle that didn't have allies. We thank you. We appreciate you. We ask you to go recruit more for us.
It's not just recruiting though.
Mm-hmm.
It's raising their children.
Aha.
It's knowing and honing that legacy of being an ally. It's
Mm-hmm.
implementing policy when they do come up the ranks and
Aha.
they do mesh with the power brokers of society.
Right?
It's all those things. It's not just bringing on more people for the team, but it's doing stuff while you're in the other.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I agree with you wholeheartedly.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I mean about the long term strategy, right? So if we look to the medium term, we have an opportunity through ballots to have our voices heard on the national, regional, and local levels. I know many people feel differently, and there's a range of emotions around voting. What I'll say to you is
Mm-hmm.
this: every aspect of your life civilly in your municipality is controlled or controllable or malleable by the people that you choose to send to your assembly, to your council, to your mayorships. So if you have no other interest, and I wish you didn't, but if you have no other interest in terms of voting, vote locally
Mm-hmm.
because that's where you'll be able to realize change most immediately about the situation that you're most frustrated about, which is what you're confronted with.
Not just vote locally, but motivating others to join your voting movement,
Oh, absolutely.
teaching and
Absolutely.
educating others about the actual power that they have in voting locally as well.
Seize the opportunity. Now, with that comes a responsibility. If you're going to cast a vote for someone who may have an opportunity to impact your life, it is incumbent upon you to do your research. Know what
Mm-hmm.
that person is about. Know what that person is promising for the future
Mm-hmm.
and make an informed decision. Irrespective of where you make a decision, I really don't care. Be active.
You're right.
Because
You're
unless
right.
you're active, you're not really willing to move the needle forward. You're just talking. You're marking time. You're a military guy. You know that, right?
I hear you.
Right?
I hear you.
So that's what I look to as one of the things that we can do in the medium term. The longer term is yes, it's where we have to look at things from a structural perspective and look to deconstruct systems, identify where the bias exists within those systems, and correct them. But to be able to accomplish that, we're literally going to need an army of allies because the system is layered. There is there is foundational law that has led to current law, and that foundational law was influenced by men who lived in a time where there were certain norms and mores, and naturally it influenced their view. And so those
Mm-hmm.
foundational laws were formed with the inherent bias of the men who framed them.
Can't the hindsight of history be a motivating factor of many? Like some of
Hmm.
us some of us who may be in a position of privilege will see just the way how we're viewing their forefathers, of how vile many of their forefathers were in recent history as well. Can't
Hmm.
that be a motivating factor to, potential allies to do what's right?
It's it's as equal a repellent as it is an attractor. It
How
all
so?
depend it all depends on the state of mind of the person. Someone who okay, let's talk about pride for a second, right? Proud to be Trini, right?
Mm-hmm.
Proud to be from a certain area, proud to have gone to a certain school. Part of what pride is an inherited perspective that you now embody and carry, but you have not contributed to yet, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so when we talk about race, it is such a central part of people's identity that it is tied into their pride of self, right? And so when we ask the questions that challenge or kind of shake the foundation of the wholesomeness of that pride that they inherited and put on and embodied and now live, it could be earth shattering. And so because that creates that polarizing effect, some people are repelled from it and they recoil back into the power structure and they no longer want to act. Whereas
Mm-hmm.
some others are motivated to lean forward into that discomfort and learn what it is to be anti-racist
Mm-hmm.
and work to be an ally. And being a true ally, it's using their privilege to give voice to those issues by living a life that embodies what anti-racism is
Mm-hmm.
and by raising children who are more aware and more culturally humble,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so that's why I say that, yeah, sometimes it's polarizing. But if I could just kind of go back to something that we hinted on, sorry, last week when we first spoke, was something that I borrowed from Will Smith, fault and responsibility paradigm,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so this is how I enter into the conversation. I say to the person, what is today is not your fault because you did not create the system that allowed for this to happen. Your forefathers did. I'm asking you on an intellectual level, if this makes no sense, then join me. And if I cannot appeal to you on an intellectual level, then I'll appeal to you on an emotional level, and I'll say,
Yeah.
does this morally seem right? And
Hmm.
if you say no, then I ask you to join me. If you say no to both of those questions, then you choose to be willfully blind and you want to continue to maintain the power structure.
Yeah.
But if you say yes to either one of those questions, then I invite you to take on the responsibility to change the system. So it's not your fault. But if you can identify with it intellectually or emotionally, then I invite you to take the responsibility to do something about it.
That's cognitive dissonance. Why
Mm-hmm.
should I? Why should I? You know, I didn't ask to be white. Why should I remove this benefit that's come my way that I didn't ask for? Why should I do that? It's gonna hurt for me socially. It's gonna hurt
Mm-hmm.
for me mentally. Why should I? Why should I give that wonderful societal advantage up?
That's $1 million question. And that's a question that every person who has become white, who has become normalized to be white, has to ask themselves.
So I
Because
mean,
historically,
good.
historically, you weren't always white. You were German or English or Scottish or Polish or Russian or whatever. Your cultural identity was reduced to whiteness. And a system has been built to benefit whiteness.
Yeah.
And so then the question then becomes, what are you proud of?
Hmm. Hmm. Well,
And
if
so
I
go ahead
if I'm
as
if you've
devil's
been
advocate
removed,
response.
if you've been removed for so far away from your German, Polish, Swedish ancestry, but you can't identify with whiteness,
Mm-hmm.
that's easy. That's easier for me to do. Ooh, I lost that sort of history, but it's easy for me to fall into this, larger group
Mm-hmm.
where we could all benefit from, where
Okay.
and I don't have to fight. I don't have to battle for benefits. I am good to go.
So let me ask you then, what are you proud of in your whiteness?
Hmm. That's a good answer that you could ask Stephen Miller. That's not a that's not something that you could
Right.
ask me personally.
You
But
know, so
I
it
get
will
what you're
then
saying.
it will then start to prompt the questions that will push the argument forward, and it's going to be uncomfortable. And you have to
Yes.
acknowledge that the other person's uncomfortable as well. And if your goal is to really have this person do some introspective work, you have to be you have to protect that relationship that could be, and you have to move slowly.
Yeah.
You cannot bulldoze if you're trying to have a conversation with someone who's open to becoming an ally.
Hmm.
Now, you meet resistance, you deal with that. You deal with that the way you deal with it.
Yeah. I got you. So let's circle back to the Caribbean immigrants experience. And
Hmm.
this today's discussion is not really going to be as long as the last one for partly two reasons.
Hmm.
I am literally fatigued, so I am kind of worn out. I've had a long day, so I'm not going to stay too long.
Right,
That,
right.
and also I have some food downstairs that
Ah,
is it's tickling my nose like, oh, this, come on down and
completely
eat.
understand, man. Completely
So
understand.
I mean, so I've got a few things that we'd like to talk about
Hmm.
for like maybe the next 20 minutes or so, and we'll call that George.
All right.
I know you heard that saying before.
Man, listen, about a hundred million times from my father.
Hmm. And that's my dad's middle name, George. So he is God bless his soul. He is going to be my daddy is going to be 80 years old in 4 days.
Okay. All right. Hey,
Poor Jack.
irony as well. George is my father's middle name.
Hey,
He ain't
it's
quite get to 80 yet, but he batting strong in that 70 something crease.
Mm-hmm, 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 mm-hmm. It's it's a wonderful thing that we could think about those that formed and structured who we are
Oh,
as
no question,
adult dads and everything like that. And
man. Listen.
let me bring up some of these comments that are coming in already. And we got one from Miss Marva Orr saying, "Hi, gentlemen. I am watching straight from Tobago,
Miss
Trinidad, where
Marva.
she is right now. How you doing, Miss Orr?" And we got one from Miss Danielle Marie. She brought this comment up: "Awakening the blindness is
Mm-hmm.
when we were talking earlier." And then, of course, your better half said,
Danielle is
"What
a
she said."
Danielle's a colleague of mine, by the way,
Okay, hi Danielle, hi Danielle, hi Danielle. Your
and
better half said,
and an
"Sorry for the many
ally.
typos."
It's
Good,
quite all right. It's quite all right, hun. It's passion.
good, good, very good, very good. But let's talk a little bit about future state.
Okay.
Obviously, we are in, you know, we we're in our 30s or something like that. You're in your 40s,
Yeah,
right? Early 40s.
yeah, I'm 40 something. Is yeah.
All right, 40 something ish. I'll be there soon, right? God
Hey,
bless, right?
come on over, man. Life is
God,
good on this
God
side.
willing, I'll be there soon. I'll be there soon. But let's talk a little bit about our future state.
Okay.
When you hear that term future, what do you mean? What do you mean by that?
There's always there's always tomorrow, or at least we
Hmm.
always have to plan for tomorrow, right? It's never guaranteed to us, but we always have to plan for tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have to ask ourselves, what did we do today that was undone that needs to be done tomorrow? In
What do
every
you mean by that?
in every dimension of our life, professionally, in our relationships with our loved ones, we have to ask ourselves, for example, if if you had on your list 4 things to do with your boys today, and you only
Mm-hmm.
got 2 of them done today, what would be your what would be your closing thought on today and your opening thought for tomorrow?
Well, hard luck for today. We go and we do that tomorrow.
Right, we'll pick up these things tomorrow. So we're always planning for the next day. So whatever is undone for today. So when we look at where we are in terms of Caribbean immigrants entering into the American context, um, where we are on our own racial identity journeys, um, ultimately we have to ask ourselves, are we comfortable with where things are today? And if there are things that are undone, then what are we planning to do tomorrow? So that's the future state that we're always building for. Or at least that's what I
Hmm.
always try to encourage is you're never going to change things overnight. So it has to be
Mm-hmm.
incremental. So you're always planning to try to get to a future state. And for me, a
Mm-hmm.
future state is a state where things aren't perfect, but we're willing to have the conversations about how do we make them equitable. And the work that I will do is commit myself to putting steps in, putting things in place step by step to accomplish that through my own work and
Mm-hmm.
through the lens that I will try to hone with my children so that that they will grow into adulthood with that awareness and that consciousness. And my hope is that they will take that mantle and continue to move things forward.
Hmm.
So that's what I
Well,
mean by future state.
it's interesting you say that you're bringing up your kids and said that you hope that they take what you've set as a structure for them and they take that mantle and they move forward and run with it. Oftentimes, Caribbean parents may want to almost guilt trip their children in being appreciative of the hard work that they've put into them.
It happens. Sometimes it does happen.
How do you, first of all, how do you address that? And how do you
Hmm.
deal with that as an adult?
That's a tough one, man. Hmm.
We'll come back to that.
Well, the reason why I struggle with it is it wasn't something that I encountered directly.
Hmm.
Um, the conversations that I had with my parents around their sacrifices for my siblings and I to be able to get the opportunities that we got, um, always they always hedged on I did this because this is my job, and I want you to be able to just flourish. But I am aware of people who've had different narratives, who've had a narrative where the parents said, "This is what I sacrificed, and this is what you owe me," or
Yeah.
as a result of it, um, I should have influence in different dimensions of your life, your decisions, and so I don't feel adequately prepared to speak on that,
Gotcha.
but I can empathize with the struggle that it must present.
Mm. And I appreciate those words because that's something that hell, I deal with it myself, and
Okay.
it's rationalizing around my own mentality. Like I don't want to be guilt tripped into doing what I naturally want to do for whomever, my family,
Mm-hmm.
my mother, my father, whoever.
Right.
And I'm not going to do that to my kids. And that's something that I think a lot of Caribbean parents unfortunately deal with.
You know.
Especially if that Caribbean parent is raising now a Caribbean American child.
Right.
The terms of discipline and listening to your parents and following your parents' every word is very different in the U.S. as is compared to the Caribbean.
Parenting is different today than it
Very much
was
so. Yeah.
20, 30, 40, 50 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Society is in a different place. Um, and I don't think a parent ever stops caring, right? It may manifest in some ways that are unidentifiable, but I don't think a parent ever stops caring. Um, and I think that parents that are dedicated to that that long-term mission evolve their parenting style over time. Um, Heck, I could see it with my parents. Um, we were raised firm but fair, firm. Um, but I understand now that we are in a time where that firmness manifests slightly differently,
Mm.
and we have a little bit more conversation than may have happened 25, 30 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't make that wrong. It just makes that what was in that context. The important thing is for us to be able to have the conversations. And so you ask me, how do you address that? Bro, I don't know, but the only way to resolve it is to lean into that discomfort. I really do embody that with every other challenge that I face in life.
Chris, I mean, that discomfort, man.
Hmm.
If you're leaning into that discomfort, that may be a thing that it may mentally hurt you. It may physically hurt you because of the anxiety of having to
Right?
have that conversation.
Then
Sometimes, sometimes
then you don't do
avoiding.
it. Then you don't do
So,
it.
yeah,
You
I
don't
was
do it
gonna
until
say
you don't do it till you have the tools to be able to do it. Would you take on building a house with a knife and a fork?
maybe a gingerbread house. That's
But you get my point. If something if that conversation is big enough and heavy enough and complex enough, then don't enter into it until you have the tools to be able to really deconstruct it and be able to put the pieces back together after.
or use a good lawyer to to keep people in their own place, right?
You use the mechanisms at your disposal.
There you go. There you go. There you go. But
Why
let's
you
talk.
Hmm?
Go ahead. What were you
No,
gonna
no,
say?
no. No, no.
Oh, okay. I was gonna say, but what about? Let's talk a little bit about legacy. What's the
Hmm.
legacy that we want to leave our children? Maybe for ourselves.
Hmm.
Maybe our legacy personally moving forward. What is the legacy? Do you want to leave a legacy of I was that person that assimilated well into American society. I embraced all that came, and my kids are a reflection of that. Or it doesn't necessarily even have to be a black or white. It could be a
No.
gray.
It's abs- it absolutely is a continuum.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think that in life you have very little absolutes on either end of a spectrum. Very little pure white and very little, solid black. And there's a lot of gray in between. Um, So when you talk about legacy, I think it's going to be as multi as multi-layered as our personalities are, right?
Mm-hmm.
So for every interest that you have an aspiration. And if you see that similar interest in your child, you have that commonality. And so naturally there's going to be an expectation that she or he will surpass me in this particular realm,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so professionally, you always want your children to exceed what you have been able to accomplish.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, Athletically, you want them to be able to rise to the highest of their own potential,
Unless you're
whatever that
Michael
is.
Jordan.
Hey,
Unless you're MJ. What? My kids?
yeah.
They're better
um,
than me? No way.
you know, my hope is that I would give them a solid moral compass that they would
Mm-hmm.
be able to navigate the world with, because the world is going to look different for them than it is for me today, as it was for our parents. Um,
Yeah.
and so the like the jobs that they're going to have don't even exist today. The
Mm-hmm.
reality, those the jobs that they're going to walk into 15, 20 years from now don't exist today. So how do we
Mm-hmm.
give them hard skills? No, we focus on giving them the soft skills to be able to be successful and and be good
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
Give them a good sense of drive. Um, I use that term of being unapologetically ambitious, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a mean spirited person in the process. But I will always push myself to be better or acquire a new skill or do something differently. And I would want to give them that same sense of purpose.
It's interesting. I tell my 11-year-old, no shortcuts, Omari. No
Mm-hmm.
shortcuts. Because when you're shortcutting, you know, that does take away the ambition of the hard work, right? I tell them,
Mm-hmm.
no shortcuts, boy. Just work hard, get what you want to do.
Mm-hmm.
You already have
Absolutely.
disadvantages, all kind of thing going on with you, but you had to work hard to get where you're trying to go, boy. That's what I tell them.
And that message that you are giving your son is a message that I can go back to my 11-year-old self and hear my father tell me,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to have to work twice as hard, but you're ready for this. But you cannot shortchange yourself.
Nah.
Work hard, the opportunity will come. And when it comes, seize it. Don't look back.
Yeah. Yeah. You know what's funny?
That's the man's message, and it's been consistent.
Here's what's funny.
Uh-huh.
My wife talked today. She said something on her status about she is thankful that we have children, especially the 6-year old, that he
Mm-hmm.
doesn't say, like, tell a fib, and he doesn't use baby talk in a lot of things. And he is very assertive in his
Mm-hmm.
presentation, and he's assertive in the way how he talks. And that's a heck of a thing for a young little black boy to have,
Yeah.
identity wise.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, you know, hell, I'll even talk about myself. I'm not as assertive as I wish I could have been,
Right.
based on maybe the way how I grew up or whatever. But, if you don't allow your child to be explorers and be assertive, it could affect them as adults. And
Massively.
raising my sons right now to be assertive and take command and no shortcutting is something that is going to benefit them in the long run.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't see anything wrong with that, man. Personally, I don't see anything wrong with that. You're not limiting them. You're giving them tools that will be transcendent. So irrespective of what you apply yourself to,
Yeah.
the standard. See, this is where standards are better than rules. Every rule needs another rule to validate it, but a standard can stand on itself. So if the standard is hard work and excellence, then irrespective of the endeavor, you bring that standard to it. But if you have rules around, you have to sit down and do your homework at 3 o'clock, and you have to sit like this, and you have to use a number two pencil, and you have another rule and another rule and another rule to create the standards you're trying to inculcate. Take away the rules, develop the standard.
I love that. That's that I like. Man, you just gave me some That is some life lessons there that I never really thought of, but it's something that I'm probably going to run with because I like that. Create standards and not necessarily just rules.
Yeah.
Because honestly, rules are meant to be broken. Standards are things that I know moving
Hmm.
forward, as a young boy coming up to be a teen, coming up to be a 20-year-old grown man, sort of thing. As a standard, I will not stand for anyone
Uh-huh.
disrespecting me. I will not stand for disrespecting myself and falling short with the expectations I have within myself. I will not
There we
stand
go.
for.
There we go. And that's the code. We start to
Mm-hmm.
develop that code. And so as we move this conversation of race forward, we ask our allies to now inculcate, to live that code and inculcate that code in their children
Yeah.
so that we can have intergenerational wealth in terms of race equity.
Mm.
And we'll get to critical mass, and this thing is going to change, but we have to continue to move the conversation forward, devoid of all the divisions, devoid of all the labels, devoid of all the bias. Be critical and ask yourself. And bias happens in many directions.
Yeah.
We have to also own that, right? And be willing to
Speak
have
on
the
speak
conversations.
speak on that a little bit. What do you mean bias on both ends? What do you mean by that?
Do I have biases? 100%. Everybody does.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
And so you have to own that. Bias is not a them thing, bias is a we thing. You have to be willing to ask yourself critically, is what I'm saying factual? Or is it
Mm.
based in some arbitrary concept that has been handed to me that I don't even know or could even validate?
Yeah.
And if the answer to that question is no, then I think you're starting to peel the first layer of bias back. And then you start asking more questions until you have nothing to peel away. And what you've done is you've now ripped that bias away from your identity. And you now say, I can own this. It's still going to exist, but I can now identify when it's happening in my brain. And I can make
Yeah.
the conscious decision to speak differently, to act differently, in not in accordance with that bias.
Mm.
We all have them.
Yeah.
You just have to do the work to start to dig and find them. And it's an
Let's
everyday thing.
let's add on a quick comment that's been shared on the discussion.
All right.
Miss Better Half says, make sure our kids have high emotional intelligence, which help them in their
Mm-hmm.
success.
No
Oh,
question.
absolutely.
No question.
Unfortunately, you know, unfortunately, some children don't really have that nurturing environment that allows for their emotional
Mm-hmm.
intelligence to bear fruit.
Yeah.
The fruit that's born from it is, a happy, societally healthy child, a child who stands on their standards, a child who is able to express themselves emotionally without fear of reprisal from those that may be their peers or their superiors or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
um, and that's really quite unfortunate in my opinion.
It is. And so my recent career pursuit has taken me into human service, which has brought me to an agency that offers services to youth that are at different phases of life and different challenges,
Mm-hmm.
some of whom are living in foster care. And you would think that these young people are broken, right? Because of their stories.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of want to borrow from a classmate of mine who has grown into like a phenomenal nonprofit leader, and he has a concept in one of his nonprofits that says broken crayons still color.
Mm-hmm.
And I see that in the young people who have every reason for things to be wrong but still find a motivation to want to have something better for themselves.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I think that not having those pieces to your foundation can definitely impact your future. But I think that if you're willing to do the work and you have the supports, which might not be within your family, but you have the supports, whether it is coach, school, club, something of the nature, you could
Mm-hmm.
still have that. it's not a substitution, but you could still have that presence and still fill that void, so to speak. So when we talk legacy, um, I think we all have to take on the importance of our own children as well as the children that we interact with. Um, I coach, and so I try to pass some of these messages on to the little kids as well as the adults that I coach. I try to influence men who are older than me in their thought patterns, um, and that's part of my action plan. And so I encourage everybody else to choose for themselves what's going to be your action to influence the legacy for your children and other children that you might come in contact with.
Speaking about contact with,
Mm-hmm.
based on social interaction skills that we have, we hand down a bit of our culture
Uh huh.
for those who interact and contact us. I was watching this ESPN thing, and they had a podcast going on with Quentin Richardson and Darius Miles,
Okay.
and who was their guest but Patrick Ewing.
Okay.
And Patrick Ewing, you all should know Patrick Ewing is probably the most famous Black Caribbean athlete, the most accomplished, anyways. I would say. Who is there? Anyone else more really accomplished than Patrick?
Usain Bolt.
No, I'm talking about that came and live in the
Oh, okay. They
U.S.
lived in the U.S.
Yes,
Uh
yes, yes, yes.
Tim Duncan is probably up in that ranks as well.
That's it. That there, yeah, 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 yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
but
But
yeah, go
Patrick
ahead. Go
Ewing,
ahead. Go
Patrick
ahead.
Ewing was who
No,
we thought of
noteworthy.
in the
Yeah.
80s and 90s, right?
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
he was talking about, being that he came from Jamaica at 12 years old and moved to Boston, and his stories of as a 12-year-old how he experienced that culture shock
Mm-hmm.
of living in Boston, but the kids were just making fun of him, and he got in fights all the time and all that stuff. And but eventually, as an adult, people learned to love and appreciate the guy because he's a hardworking fella
Right.
who happened to play for the most famous basketball arena in the world, right?
Right.
The culture that he presented to the folks are, some of the aspects that resonates, I think, with you and I, with especially as a West Indian, is that hard working aspect. It's that need to just show out and show off and perform when the lights are on and you're doing your thing as you're supposed to.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk a little bit about, is that the type of culture sharing that we want to give to our kids and to those that run into us? What type of things do you have that you want to share to those that interact with you?
Hmm. What would I want someone to take away? Great. I don't think I've ever been asked that question before.
Mm-hmm.
Um. Poof. Wow. Uh. It's kind of easy to want to talk about yourself in terms of the things that you have done
Mm-hmm.
because those are the easy go tos. That's the low hanging fruit. Um,
Mm-hmm.
who am I? I I am a student. I am a father. Um, I'm a student of fatherhood because I'm
Mm-hmm.
always learning from these children. Um, I'm a lover of history. Never thought that because I struggled through it in high school. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I'm, I'm, a, I'm, I'm passionate about social justice. I'm unapologetically pro black, which does not mean I'm anti anyone. I'm just always
Mm-hmm.
pro me. Um, I would I would like to believe that I am constantly working on my moral compass,
Mm-hmm.
and with that, expanding my own empathy. And admitting that sometimes I struggle and I get frustrated, and I don't want to take the high road. I don't want to try to grow. I just want to just react.
And stamp out that situation when it happens.
Yeah, yeah, and sometimes those situations need to be handled that way.
Mm-hmm.
And what I'm learning to do is to discern the difference between how I would handle it, how someone else would handle it, and where the boundaries of my opinions on how that person handles their own situation exist.
Hmm. I think I think you just kind of I think you hit exactly all the points that I welcome and I appreciate. Chris, this two-part series that we've had
Hmm.
over the past 2 weeks now is something that I appreciate, and it's something that I really you know, it's something I'm gonna look back on. Like, hey, I actually had this discussion with Mr. Spence. Um, it's something that I learned a few lessons now, some fatherhood lessons that I'm probably gonna run with moving forward. And I just wanted to say, man, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for having these conversations with me.
I appreciate the opportunity to have them, man. Um, we learn and we grow together.
Yes,
Steel,
sir.
steel sharpens steel. So, hey, if I say something or I do something, don't be a chorus to wrong, man. Let me know when I'm, let me know when I'm doing wrong, so I can straighten up, and we hold
You
each other
think
accountable.
do you think I will hold back on calling
No,
people
no,
out
no,
on
no,
their
no, 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 no,
BS?
no, 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 not at all, not at all. I just had to put it out there. But no,
Yes,
seriously,
sir. Yes, sir.
if we're going to be friends, we have to be willing to be able to hold each other accountable.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and we aren't always going to get it right, but that the value of that relationship is what we have to look at in the big picture.
Yeah.
And so even when these times are very unsettling and
Mm-hmm.
emotions are raw and things are going to be said, I'm not saying give everybody a pass,
Mm-hmm.
but understand that people are processing things in their own way.
People are going through some things, and you need to give people the ability to
To be.
let. You can't tell a hurt person how they should feel.
Mm,
Let people be hurt. Let people have that raw emotion. Let people express how they feel.
right.
Whether they are white, they are black, they are brown, or they are blue.
Hmm. And
Frat, I
then
appreciate you. I
same here,
appreciate you,
man.
man.
Same here. Same here. We have to continue to have these conversations.
Well, I'm open to it, so it's coming. Here's the
All right.
thing. Monday, I have another one that's coming up. It's with Dr. Khalid Shabazz.
Ooh,
The
ooh,
name of
Imam.
that discussion. Yes,
Yeah,
it is. If you're what? Hold on. Before I quote this thing wrong,
yeah,
let
yeah.
me
No,
let me
let's
tell you the
let's
let me
bridge to
tell you
Monday,
the.
man.
He said. Let me tell you the exact name of it. It says, if your ship don't come out don't come in, swim out to meet it. So I'm
Hmm.
looking forward to that discussion. If you want to jump in, it's on Monday at 6 p.m. Central Time.
I will definitely be joining to listen into the conversation between you and Imam Shabazz because I know
Yeah,
it's gonna be full of
it's going to
information.
be fire, as he likes to say. It's going to be fire. But hey,
No, definitely.
let me go and name this food my wife cooked,
Hey,
right?
all the best to you and your family, man. Be well.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Later now. Take care.